Good evening. I am Julius Bailey, professor of philosophy here at Wittenberg University, and I am excited to welcome you here to our third installment. You heard it, our third installment here on today, the 29th of October, of our Conversations on Race series. We call it Amplifying Whispers. And we are just appreciative of Wittenberg University for hosting this event on Facebook as well as YouTube. And so please tell a friend, share it with somebody, because tonight's discussion, as the ones previously, will certainly be of interest. I'm going to introduce you to my co-host of this entire series, Miss Jasmine Evans.
Hello, everyone. I am Jasmine Evans, and like Dr. Bailey said, this is our third installment of the Amplifying Whisper series. We're glad to be back here with you guys after a few weeks off. And like he said, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm a biology major, and I have two minors, one in marine science and the other one in African studies. So today we will be talking about the perspectives on climate justice, which personally I'm super excited about, being a big science girl, to hear Adam Brown, who is a WIT grad of 2014, also a biology major, and also with us today here at Wittenberg, we have Dr. Fortner, who is an environmental science professor. They have some great stuff for us, and we can't wait to hear them.
No question. And so I mean, you're a biology major, you're an active student. Like, what does the conversation on climate justice mean to you?
Yeah, so I actually kind of like to focus on the conservation aspect of biology. So, and having Dr. Fortner and Adam talk about climate justice, I think it's very, very important, especially with what's going on in our world today. If you've seen in the news with the forest fires, sea level rising, coral bleaching, but also just how that impacts almost every part of our lives. So make sure, like I said, it's a huge part of what's going on today. And if we want things to change, we need to make sure we have the right people in office to change it. So along with climate justice, we also have issues with racist policies, systemic racism that is also ingrained in our society. So make sure to get out and vote. The election is this Tuesday, November 3rd. So go out and do something about it.
I mean, that's important information, right? To vote, right? If you haven't already voted, please make sure you vote. But as we kind of wrap up this conversation, as you're sitting wherever you're sitting, at home, in your office, I want you to put yourself in the mind frame of what does justice look like to you, right? And honestly, when you typically have conversations around justice, right? You want to hear conversations around, fighting in the streets, or you want to have conversations around, police brutality or things like economic situations. But you know what? The reality is a conversation like climate justice, environmental justice encompasses all those things, right? And so what you need to think about today is, in what ways do we, you, I, your mama, your cousin, your sister, how do we contribute to our environment? Are we just citizens, one? And then two, the same way you keep track of how many polices are doing this, or how many banks are doing that, or how many schools are doing this, you need to keep track of how our government, state, local, and federal, are engaged in questions of ecological, environmental, and climate justice, right? You have to keep your minds on that, right? Because people are affected, right? It may not be you, right? But somebody is living near a toxic dump, right? Somebody is living and drinking bad water. Somebody is having to live in lead paint type of situation. Somebody is involved in processes in which they've lost homes because of flooding, and lost homes because of hurricanes, and not having a way to get back in those displaced folk. How do we make those people whole? That's the justice question. And that's the question that my phenomenal colleague in Dr. Sarah Fortner, who teaches me. I mean, I sort of, I tap her brain and ask her about different things so I can be better voiced. So I'm excited that she'll give you this. And quite frankly, my chest couldn't be any bigger to see Adam Brown here. I remember when he was a student here, I was a new student, her professor, and to see him doing the great work with his organization, as well as working with community organizations, you are in for a treat tonight. So we're going to be quiet, right? We're going to let Professor Fortner come in. So in 30 seconds, we will begin Perspectives on Climate Justice.
Hey, oh, like the whole whispers thing that was taken a little too literally. My hearing aid just fell out. Anyway, aside from that quick aside, I really appreciate this opportunity to be with you here. It's a wonderful thing. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with Adam and with you all. And the introduction couldn't be better. I think Jasmine really pointed out some of the key climate impacts we're thinking around. And Dr. Julius Bailey talked about how they kind of affect people in different ways, and knowing that is really important to the justice element. So we kind of want this to be interactive. So if you could, the first question I have for you is, when you think about climate change and what the impacts are, what are you thinking around? What topics come to mind for you? And while you're typing your responses, I can tell you some of the things that I hear teaching climate change. And I think frequently I hear a lot about sea level rise or whatever the big issue is in the news. We hear a lot about forest fires now. I think I come from a glacier background, and so I'm really familiar with a lot of people talking about, glaciers are melting pretty rapidly, and that's changing how the Arctic is. Some people think about the image of a polar bear. Those things really come to mind a lot. I'm not sure what you all are saying right now. Is people typing? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, other things. Yeah. So when we think about impacts, I think a lot of the impacts that we think about are far away things, right? So you're thinking about something that doesn't seem like it's happening in your neighborhood to you. Or to people that maybe aren't you, but maybe just live a few blocks away in a slightly different situation. So climate impacts, I think when we first started thinking about the climate system and studying climate change as scientists, we focused on these really big, large scale processes, and the news kind of followed suit, and you would hear about these big, big stories. But really, when we think about how to make change, and we think about who's going to be mobilized to act on this issue, it's about making a more personal connection and understanding how climate change impacts you where you live and how it impacts the people who live just down the street. And so it's kind of, to me, I'm really curious what people say when you ask them, what are the climate impacts that you know?
What is the effect, or what are the reasons of the effect of these hurricanes and tropical storms? Is that related to climate change?
So a good question about hurricanes came up. When we think about hurricanes, one of the major things that scientists have been studying about them is that there is more intense rainfall associated with them. So you can think about Harvey or something like that, where you have just way more rain than typically used to fall. And so, we're warming the ocean, we're changing things in the ocean, and that's changing the amount of rainfall that's associated with these storms. So yeah, that's certainly associated with climate change. Yeah. So yes.
CO2 emissions are the first thing that come to my mind, because humans are the main cause for it. And I think a lot of people don't know that we can actually track our carbon footprints.
That's an excellent point. So we've been tracking carbon in our atmosphere since the 1950s in Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And then progressively, there have been more stations added around the globe. And we understand that CO2 is rising and it's coming from us. But the impacts of climate change, that rising and that heating of our atmosphere, it causes a cascade of impacts that are not just related to temperature, but all these other things like more intense storms. In Ohio, we have things like more spring rainfall and flooding that happens. You may have neighbors that have had their basement flooded. You may know people who are in agriculture who are losing their topsoil and having to deal with flooding there. So we see these things happening, and those are attributed to climate change. And so even though we're adding CO2, there's this cascade of interconnected responses that happens. Oops. So okay. All right. So then the next thing I want to talk about is that the impacts of climate change. So we talk about, there's flooding in your neighborhood, or a hurricane happens or something like that. Those things are not felt equally by everyone. If you have more resources, if you have insurance, you're more able to recover when you have a flood to your home. You may even be able to capitalize. Some people come in and capitalize on after disasters and are able to reestablish new businesses, whereas other people are left totally without resources and have to move away from the place they've been living their whole lives. And when you think about these sorts of impacts, usually the tougher impacts happen to people who are already facing tough conditions. Maybe you're living in a home and just scraping by. Maybe you're food insecure. Maybe you're in a school district that's less well funded and you don't have the resources that people nearby you have. And so when disaster happens, when a climate event happens, it really amplifies the sort of hardships that you face in that neighborhood. And so I really think about what really started to resonate with me thinking about the issue of climate change is how we really ought not to be looking at it like a line. Here's CO2 going up, here's temperature going up, here's flooding going up. It's who's impacted the most and where. And it can be just neighborhoods apart. I can take my bike and go from one side of town to the other and see totally different conditions. And some people might, on a hot day, be living without air conditioning, things like that. So these sorts of impacts are disproportionately felt by people who are already facing a tough time. And so when we think about empowering climate justice or problem solving in this arena, we're really thinking about how do we develop solutions that address the real problem, which is at that neighborhood scale.
And it's an interesting point because there was a question, how do you feel that climate change affects food deserts, right?
Oh, yeah.
At the neighborhood level, right?
Oh, that's such a great question, thinking about climate change and food deserts. You can just think about just access to resources, period. Food, green space that keeps your home cooler, access to safe environments. All of these things are interconnected. And at the neighborhood scale, you tend to have places that are hotter, that have more pollution, more air quality problems, and have a food desert. These tend to be interrelated. In fact, that's the next slide I have, which is really the social determinants of health, thinking a little bit about how healthy we are really is related to multiple interconnected factors. And so when you have something like climate change happening and making conditions harder, more flooding, maybe it's hotter in the summer, your house is getting hotter, and you're trying to decide, do I buy food for my family, or do I try to cool my house down in some way? And so you have to make these decisions. And all of these different factors are interconnected, our access to food, to health, to education, safe, healthy environments. All of these things are interconnected, and climate change and how you experience it is really related to these factors. So usually when one of these conditions is harder, there's multiple conditions that are harder. And now Adam is going to talk a little bit about, we have, are you, oh, maybe. Okay, and so, oh, you here? Okay, go ahead. I'll just dance while I wait for a second.
There you go.
I'm just kidding. Well, I think my kids are
I
watching.
think I'm here now.
Yeah. So we're thinking, I just was talking a little bit about how when you have one health condition or one environmental factor, or education factor, how neighborhoods are this like complex system, and people tend to have multiple hardships at once. And so now just talking a little bit about Katrina and what happened there.
Yeah, with Katrina, when you look at what happened with Katrina, a lot of minorities were forced out. They were forced out of their homes. I got to see this firsthand. I would say one third of African Americans that left New Orleans, they did not return. So to put that into more context, 75,000 African Americans did not return after Hurricane Katrina, and it's so sad what happened there, because when I was there, I saw so much, just homeless people, all that stuff. I think after Hurricane Katrina, there was around 11,000 homeless people, and the carnage that was left behind was just it was terrible. And if you were in a situation where conditions were rough, you're unable to before the hurricane, you were not in a good financial situation. It's going to be nearly impossible for you to recover from something like that.
Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah, and I keep thinking, with Katrina, it's just one event, right? And there's been multiple hurricanes in multiple places, and we're just one part of the world, and it's hard to see this amount of suffering just kind of happen without change.
Right.
So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I know we had thought, when we were talking about this, we talked about Katrina, and you have this unique perspective from being in like the health field and thinking about how important it is to care for people.
Yes.
Yeah. And I just think, so we had the example of New Orleans and Katrina, and then then looking at just even what's happening in cities now. If we look at how there's these legacies of how we zoned our houses.
Yes.
For 100 years, for a century, basically, we've been zoning houses based on racist policy. Even those policies have gone away. The sort of neighborhood scale inequities have been amplified through time, because what's happened is that cities will decide to divest in neighborhoods that have been divested in for a long time already. And so if you're in a place that doesn't have green space and shade, you're not likely to get that, because houses are starting to fall down and people don't want to do that investment. But what that does then is, if you grew up there, if you're a kid living in that neighborhood, you're experiencing a condition where, you don't have access to parks and it's 10 degrees warmer. And I just have some figures just showing how hot is it, if you're under a tree versus near the street. It's much, much hotter. And you've all been outside on a hot day and felt that dark pavement and how hot that is. If that's your reality in your neighborhood, that's not as nice as having a beautiful park and a place that you can plan and enjoy and relax in. And in fact, you might think, oh, that can't be that big of a difference. There's not, it can't be, you're just talking about a degree or two here. But in fact, a city like Portland, the difference between that was that's more than 10 degrees warmer in a neighborhood that was zoned in a racist way. So you don't have access to a park. Your house, maybe you can't afford air conditioning, and it's super hot. And there's just people aren't putting pools in or something that you can use to cool off. And so it's just really not not a good thing. And I know you think about like other health issues too. I know we
Right.
that, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'll say this, you know, just from my experience, just from my experience with working in neighborhoods that, you know, are underserved,
Mhm.
you know, they are resources are limited. You know, and it's literally, you know, so things are exacerbated when catastrophic events happen. Things are exacerbated, and like using. So when you look at it from, you know, I guess we could look at it from just, you know, a perspective of, you know, pollution. You know, when you think about pollution, 1 out of 5 African Americans, you know, live within a half mile of, you know, oil refineries, and that's a problem because when you look at COVID, exposure to pollution also increases your chances of dying. So if you're having minorities primarily live in these zones where, you know, pollution is high, you're going to see higher death rates. Yeah, it's just it. It really does. It really does. It bothers me to a certain extent because I think we have to start thinking about how climate affects everyone.
Mhm.
And if we're going to really tackle this problem, we have to be willing to be open minded, and we have to take all perspectives into consideration because it is costing lives. Um, you know, and just I've worked in these neighborhoods. You know, I've seen, you know, the blighted houses. I've seen, you know, just not even just air pollution. You know, lead, all that stuff, and you know the temperatures. I like you said, you know, in regards to temperatures, I've seen the temperature increase. I remember when I was a child. I remember having, you know, nice white Christmases. Now it's, you know, Christmas is a couple months. So it really does impact, you know, the way we experience our seasons as well. And I know just, you know, just from really living in the city, I grew up in the city. And I think, you know, I've seen everything that you're saying. I've experienced it. I've seen it with my own eyes. The heat. It's hotter. There's no trees. You know, and that really does contribute to, you know, like you said, the hotter summers.
Hmm. Yeah, and I heard we might have some questions. Yeah.
Yeah, so just after you guys touched a little bit on how different things that due to the climate, how that impacts communities that are already disenfranchised and almost makes it worse, price comments, the aftermath of Katrina seemed to amplify the hardships that some of the people were already experiencing. But also, a fellow classmate and friend of mine, Trina Rosing, asks, how do you try to manage the effects of climate change in a culture that doesn't trust a bunch of unfamiliar scientists coming into their country?
That's a great question. Do you want to, Adam? Do you want that one?
I'll take that one. I got that. So you know, it's the same. So I work in clinical research. That's my, you know, that's my space. And if we're going to tackle climate change, we have to tackle, you know, it's all science. So we have to be willing to educate the communities, like literally go to the communities and educate them. You know, have those tough conversations, answer their questions that they, you know, it may not seem like a good question to you or whatever it is, you know, but people's questions, understand how they feel, you know, approach it with empathy. I think those are going to be that's going to be the best way to approach it, because you have to understand people are scared of science, and that's just the reality. It does scare people, so we honestly have to be willing to, you know, listen and teach at the same time.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that. I mean, the listening part's important. I mean, I was trained to ask research questions and pursue them. And so, what happens when a glacier melts to the chemistry, something like that. And now I think one of the most important things I can research is, what are people saying that will enable this change? What is the priority of the folks that are living in conditions that are really hard? I mean, because if we know that more, if we know, maybe climate's not even on that list,
Right.
we might start to find better connections and have more meaningful conversations about the priority issues, and make those connections and show that we're going to show up and we're going to listen and do what matters to people who are telling us what matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you anymore.
Yeah. No, and I think I'm really been enjoying talking to you in my class too, Adam. I mean, it's nice to have this trusted presence in an area that is hard now. And from my perspective, I mean, I don't come from that, but I can talk to you, and I can try to work on building trust, and my students can learn how to navigate, because you are willing to do that with us. And that kind of thing is super important, because we need these like translations and connections to move forward better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think also, just to, build on that question, if one thing that I've noticed is, really, whatever we do, including the community, like letting them participate in the strategy is going to be important as well. And like I said, I told you some time ago, I said, surveying and all that stuff, getting the community's feedback is huge. That's another way to build trust, just letting them participate. But yeah, that was a great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead. Okay, our next question comes from, I believe, a class of 2016 WIC grad who was an environmental science major. If you're familiar with Miss Emily Macarado, she asks, do you think we would be able to handle future pandemics or viruses with COVID, like COVID, with the addition of natural disasters and the economic impact it would have?
To handle this like again into the future?
Yes, if this were to happen again, how do you think that would play out?
Is that one for me?
Yeah, that's yours, Adam. No. Hi, Emily.
Well, okay, so,
still asking the tough questions, huh?
No, I think we will. To make, if I'm answering this correctly, I think you're asking me if we'll be able to handle it in the future, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so we will. COVID has taught us a lot. In order for us to get past COVID, we have to learn from it. So in the future, we're only going to get better at dealing with incidents like this. Now, in saying that, we can't ignore climate change. So we have to also make sure that climate change is at the forefront, because it exacerbates everything. For like I said, from, if we're talking about, I mean, it's literally like a domino effect. So I mean, if we're talking about, like we could be talking about like algae, in the toxic algae in the water, it's everywhere, and it harms drinking water. It harms, the way we breathe, all that stuff. So we have to be mindful, how we move forward. But I think that the best way to tackle it in the future is going to be, really coming together and understanding everyone's position, and what they've faced, the conditions that they're in, all that stuff. We have to take all those things into account in order to move forward. But I don't think that's something that we can't do. We, as a people, we've all overcome a lot. So I think this is something that we can get past if we roll up our sleeves and do it.
I like your message of hope, Adam. I think that's a super important one. And then like the other thing that I think around is, I mean, what can we do? Who are the people that are making change that we can look to and model our work on? I've been reading a lot of like theory of change around how do you engage against systemic issues like racism, climate, the issue, like all of these issues where, there's target groups basically that are so if we're going to engage for systems change, we can't just accept our comfort. If we have that, we have to look for the policies we can change that will change things. We have to think about the practices that, like, how do we bring people together to do things in a different way? Think about the resource flows, like who gets money if you're doing community development activities, what gets money? Is it for neighborhoods or is it for revitalization of an area that already has a lot? So thinking about those, like thinking about the systems change aspect of it. And like you said, like we have to come together to do that and not be lazy and let things happen, but really proactively engage if we can, right? Not everybody is able to right away. So but we can always listen. We can always listen to people.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I think that, we can do a lot, if we come together, because there are going to be things that I can accomplish that maybe you can't, maybe you can't. So that's where that whole, us working together becomes important. I think, just from my work in communities, it's amazing. You see a lot on the news, and you think that people don't want to change and all that stuff. But when you talk to people in the communities, like they want it, they're just not involved. They don't know what's happening outside of the walls that they're in. So we have to, like, that goes back to what I was saying. We have to make sure people are included in everything that we do as scientists, in every aspect of life. And we also, one important thing is to address how we, like you said, distribute, resources, but also opportunities. We have to get to a point where, we're not holding people back from opportunities. We need, we need more doctors in the world. We need, more minority doctors, so we have to get to a point where we are more open-minded in all aspects of life.
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah, more questions? We'll take another question. Yeah.
Okay. We have two of them. So we'll start with this one first. You had mentioned the idea of working with stakeholders. And so the question is, very specifically with the two of you, what are some, a specific example that you use in your work as you work to advance climate justice and equity?
What was the last one? I couldn't hear you.
It says, what is a specific stakeholder that you?
Yeah, what's an approach you use when you're working with stakeholders to advance climate justice and equity, or something that's parallel to, if that might work with your work, Adam? Right.
So in terms of my work, like I said, I work in the clinical space. So, I deal a lot with increasing access to clinical trials in the, in underserved communities, right? But with my strategy, my strategy is built upon creating more jobs for minorities, thereby giving them access, giving them the funds they need to take care of themselves, so it's kind of it's a situation, empower people. We have to be willing to work with the powers, high up, have to be willing to empower the people that, need to be empowered in the communities, so that they can take care of themselves. Because if you just, throw money at a situation, that's not going to solve anything. That money's going to disappear, and then people are going to wonder what to do next. you have to empower people. You have to give people the tools they need to fix a situation.
Yeah, I love when you're talking about empowering people because as an educator, I think about talking about climate change, not even climate justice, but just climate change is something that people have discomfort about because maybe there's a science element that's confusing or something that they're worried about somebody pushing back on hearing about climate change because it's been so polarized. And
Right.
so when I think about it from my perspective, I try to, in my assignments or engagements with the community, I bring my students into that and have them think about what do you think find an audience that you want to engage around climate issues. And how are you going to learn from that audience and share something that helps them learn? And I think that exchange that knowledge exchange helps us think about we need to learn those perspectives from people on issues, even if the answer is, hey, I don't believe you yet, right? We need to know that.
Absolutely. And, from just in my line of work, with the work that I do, we talk to communities all the time. Like we ask them, when we're interacting with them for clinical trials, what if you don't want to participate? Why? Are you scared? Is it because we gave you this information and you didn't understand what it was? You didn't. So that goes back to really assessing where the person stands as well, because a no is a no, but you can also learn something from that and come back with a better opportunity for the individual. But one thing that I've learned in the clinical space is that we have to, and it's all linked. Climate change, clinical research, all this linked because it affects your health. So it's like, if climate change gets worse, then people are going to be sick, and then it's going to be more work on my end. So, but we really just have to start with understanding where everyone stands, and then learning from that on our ends, and then also educating the people, like you said, educating the people on the other end, that may not understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the art of conversation is underrated, and I think anybody I think it's great if any of you are what can I do? You can talk to people because it is an uncomfortable issue, and just breaking that ice and trying to find some connection is super important.
Yes, absolutely.
Bryce Durney, who I believe is a current environmental science student here at WIT, asked, how can we make information on climate change easier to understand for individuals who are not fully familiar with the concept? And I believe this could also be tied into, or if you could elaborate more on what discussions would also need to happen in businesses and community development offices, just what information could you get out to the public to kind of help become more informed on issues around climate change and climate justice?
I think from a business standpoint, we need, right now, working virtually, it's not that bad. I think we need to be more mindful when we build these offices and all this stuff. I think we have to think from a standpoint of, we need to start thinking from a standpoint of what damage are we doing as we're as we're launching our businesses and all that stuff. I think that's important. If that answers your question, I hope.
Yeah, when I hear part of the question of how do we connect to people that don't have the same language or level of understanding that we have in the sciences, as somebody who studies the physical sciences, I love working with artists, with people who study cognitive psychology and understand what is what's resonating with somebody's mind when they hear something, thinking about how across the liberal arts, we have this opportunity to connect with people around this. And so looking for those sparks and trying to, like, when I hear amplifying whispers, I look for the spark and try to amplify that.
Right.
And think about that, and also approach it like research, because there is a lot of people who are researching, which communication styles are effective. I know Dr. Cheryl Cunningham comes to my class and talks about styles that are going to resonate more, or shame, like what things will work and what won't. And so kind of understanding those and using that. We know that personally connecting to people, it really matters. So even if you can say, look, I know that there's a lot of complexity here, but you've seen this in your backyard. You know, this person had this experience, and finding those threads to connect to people, I think really can be powerful.
Absolutely. I know from personal experience that having me going to a neighborhood that I understand, it's a lot easier for me to deliver information to them, because I understand the nuances that comes with living in that environment. I know how they speak, all that stuff, and it's a lot easier to make a connection. And I think in my industry, I'm able to really make those connections with the underserved community a lot easier because of that, because of my experience, because I have experienced a lot of the stuff that they've been through, and I think that really changes a lot. Being a scientist, me going to a community that I lived in, or that I understand how these people feel. It's going to change a lot. It's going to change my approach.
Yeah, no, that's really it's when you think about like how are you going to connect with people, your experiences come from like being in like a more vulnerable neighborhood where there's more of these overlapping challenges that you felt, and I've come from a different perspective, but I recognize how powerful the approach is that you're talking about, Adam. And I also think the other thing is that if you have some kind of expertise, like how can you get into a room where decisions are being made or information is being shared, that you can contribute the message that needs to go out in the way that it needs to go out. So I think about a lot of folks that are in the environmental science program at Wittenberg. We serve in advisory roles in the community. And so we work with people who are making decisions about agriculture, water, soil, wetlands, species, these types of things. And so because we are in those rooms, we can bring these issues to bear on the conversations that are being had about like what should the conservation priorities be, just bringing that into the room is really powerful. So like thinking about it from the community perspective, but also like how do we create those linkages between who's making decisions and the community. And then the best thing is to create a pathway from who's living in communities so that they have the real power in the decision. So like how can we create these linkages?
Absolutely. And I think that creating that link, I think that starts with that's the whole opportunity aspect that I was speaking on, giving people the opportunity to, with my strategy, I give people the opportunity that wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to participate in clinical research, to have a job in research. It's all about giving people, like I like to say, giving people the opportunity to experience stuff. I may not like doing this, but if I try it, I don't know, it's all about giving people the opportunity to try things, and expose them and give them the opportunity to, make a decision on something. I think that'll go a long way.
Yeah, no, that's super, super important. Yeah. Another question? Yeah. What?
Without being partisan, what should we who are about to vote think about as we're listening to our presidential candidates talk about environmental justice issues?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, and I don't know, Adam, do you feel like you can answer this one without being partisan? I can try.
You cut out a little bit. Can you repeat that? I apologize.
I'll answer it first then because it cut out. But the question is like, without being partisan, how should we reflect on the two presidential candidates and their environmental platforms now? And so when I hear about this question, I've been teaching climate change through multiple elections now. And I've always taken the approach of colleagues of like, say, well, let's research what their platform is and then compare that to the science that we have and the information that we have. And when you start looking at the magnitude of climate impacts and the injustices felt and the sort of cost that aren't really calculated, like we think about healthcare cost, the cost of relocating, what happens when there are fires and you move, like all of these things are not in the sort of like, let's keep burning carbon. And so looking at those costs and compiling them and then looking at care, like who's the person that's caring for people in the way that you want to. Do you want to see this as a line where, or do you want to start looking at and thinking about neighborhood level healing? So like doing those kinds of comparisons is how I think about it. And I also think the other thing that I've been doing in class is, in addition to showing the sort of climate impacts that are happening and how, giving my students a chance to hear perspectives from people who are facing the brunt of impact. So there's a lot of powerful podcasts out there like The Green Dreamer. There's lots of material out there that gives you the chance to share perspectives of people who are most impacted. And if you care about that, that might help guide your decisions. And I think, to me, why should we design our end state around not caring for our most vulnerable?
I'm honestly, you took the words out of my mouth. I have the same personality, to be honest with you. I think along the same lines. I try to approach everything with an open mind. I try to weigh the pros and the cons, and see where that leads me. But again, I am a very empathetic person, so I can't. It's hard to see. Like you said, it's hard. Watching. You have to make sure that the people that are vulnerable are taken care of. I can't watch people die. So we have to make our decisions based on that. If you care about taking care of people, and then that the decision should be you should base it off of what you find. Just say that.
You don't think it? No, I almost said something partisan. I just pack it up. Are you ready? Oh yeah. Wait, what?
That was a tough one.
No, it's interesting because I think I want my students or anybody listening to make their own choices, and you're weighing all these issues, right? But to me, this is a critical issue. Like I've heard the term. Don Whitehead was mentioning the term, we're in a dual pandemic of systemic racism and COVID-19, but maybe we're in a triple pandemic, a triple pandemic when we add the climate crisis. Yeah. So, you're coming in?
I'm gonna join you.
Come on in.
I don't want you to be partisan, but I can. No. No. I do want to push back. Hey, Adam, how you doing, brother?
How's it going?
Look, I do want to push back a little bit. We have about 10 minutes. I do want to kind of talk about specifically some of these issues, right? So when they talk about things like when we're watching the TV screen and they're arguing about fracking, right? And so, most students, what is a frack? What are they doing with their fracking? That kind of thing, right? So Trump gets mad at Biden. Biden says, no, I'm not. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. Then last week he goes to Philadelphia and says, I'm not going to stop your fracking, right? So I guess the question really about politics is that you have to hold them both accountable, right?
Yes.
Because again, if we believe as environmental justice folk that as Adam said earlier, where you do your oil drilling, how you approach your oil drilling does affect water contamination, does affect toxicity, right? And when you do that in communities that cannot rebound from it, Flint, for instance, and others, right? Then that should be an issue we talk about, right?
Yeah, you can't, if people are facing pain and you know about it, you shouldn't be backing away from that and accepting that. Yeah,
right.
No, I agree. Yeah, that how do you engage? I think we should be pushing for the policies that we want.
Right. And then I think, Adam, I just asked you to respond. I can't hear you, brother, so I'm just going to ask this and step out. But Adam, man, you and I go to places. I mean, we've stopped at a dollar store before, right, bro? Right. And we know the dollar stores got like, the light bulbs that cost 99 cents in the dollar, right? So we want to have conversations, right, about how do we, decrease our footprint? How do we create, carbon emissions as well as, energy reduction and that kind of thing, alternative forms of energy. But that kind of stuff costs money. Right. And so when you ask somebody poor who does their shopping at dollar store or Dollar General, so no, don't buy the dollar light bulbs, buy the $20 light bulbs that'll last long. I mean, that does have economic impact too, right, Adam?
Right. You make a great point. If you don't have the finances to live a better life, you can't. You have to look out for those people. It's that simple. You have to look. You can't let people that are vulnerable, just be at a disadvantage. And when you're in a situation, like I said, when you're in a situation where you can't afford things, I've seen it. You got to make a decision. Should I buy this or buy that? And it's not a fun situation for people. And then you throw in all the other stuff, health issues, all that stuff. It just makes a very, very, very challenging environment for people. And it's hard to get out of.
Yeah, it's hard when you put that challenge on folks.
Right. I mean, who's buying Teslas, right? They're not buying Teslas in the hood, right? I mean, they may want to, right? But the reality is to actually go fully. I mean, the reality of this conversation is why I appreciate you too. And I'm gonna step back here. But I think the question, though, when we talk about politics and the way of an effect is that we have to hold folk accountable. And they had these conversations. As you said, you've gone to 2 or 3 electoral processes right now where you had these conversations. And we have to say, listen, don't sit up here argue 20 minutes over is the Green New Deal good or not. The question is, what are you doing for people who are adversely affected by your policies? What are you doing to make sure that poor people aren't disadvantageously affected? What are you doing to make sure that the ways in which you engage in this conversation isn't just for corporatized bodies and your boy at Tesla and folk like that, right? I mean, that's
seriously,
saying, right?
No.
So that's all. I'm sorry, Adam. I'm gonna get out y'all. You got about 5 minutes to wrap this up.
Yeah. I like that. I appreciate Dr. Bailey's energy. I feel it, and I've had that like fire, but like the actual the voice of that. I appreciate that strong voice that you have. So thank you for that.
I like the whole holding both sides accountable, because that's honestly the best way to approach it. You have accountability. Accountability is the best way to approach it. And that comes from people, like I said, people being open-minded. Hey, these communities can't afford this. They can't afford, I went to a high school where we had to operate off of worksheets because we couldn't afford to provide everyone books. So, it's real. It's a real problem, and if you cannot afford something, and then you have people who can afford everything talking about your fate, so to speak, it's, and you're not included.
Yeah. And you're not going to be able to, if you don't have, I'm sorry. Oh, it's cutting out a little. Oh, sorry. And so, so if you're not able to afford that the light bulb that will save you money in the long run, or make that energy transition on your own.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a fair burden for you to have to do. And you're not contributing to the climate crisis as much as the person that, is going on 20 vacations a year. So we need to take that into account too. Is it fair? Is it just that those that are contributing the least to this crisis are paying for it the most?
Amen. Amen.
Great point. Growing up, when I would say up until,
just to wrap up.
Oh, sorry.
What happened?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Did you have a final thought? And then Jasmine was going to, I think, wrap us up.
Oh no, I was just saying you made a great point. I've experienced the whole, so for example, people in underserved communities may not even, have access to cars. So if you're not driving, then, you're not even a factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I was trying to say. I agreed with your point.
Yeah. No. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Oh yeah. No.
But just as a final question, what do you see as steps folks can take right now, no matter what their roles are, if they want to tackle the issue of climate injustice?
What do you say, Adam?
I think that we have to start helping the underserved. We have to give them access to resources that are, like I said, empower them, whether that's, having access to, like little gardens where they can go and plant food, planting trees, stuff like that. We have to invest in these communities. You can't tell somebody who has limited funds to invest in something because they don't have it, So it's all about everyone coming together and understanding and really investing in one another and seeing the person next to them that may be struggling and saying, hey, let's help these people over here. Let's make sure that they can get up on their feet so that they can, operate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, like being able to see challenges and respond to them. Voting, think about the climate, what's happening and what you'd like to see and voting on it. And then talking to people about climate, talking to people about racial injustice and systemic racism, and how do we tackle issues that are affecting some people more than others, and what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to build power or shift power? I mean, if I'm comfortable in burning a lot of carbon and enjoying my house, what can I do? Like who are the lobby groups, the activists that I can join in? Who can I write to? I think we can all find ways that we can have these conversations or find these political opportunities.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. We do have to, we have to be willing. First of all, we have to be willing to have the conversations. Conversations are important. And that's what I try to do all the time, have those tough conversations, because I think that'll lead to an understanding that people may not even anticipate happening.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. I know I like talking to you, Adam. It's a good end. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, we thank you both, Adam. It's good to see you, brother. Great work that you're doing. And we thank you, Professor Fortner, for engaging the audience and for teaching, for exploring, for getting us engaged in something that fundamentally affects us all. We certainly will keep this in mind as we go into Tuesday and certainly beyond. We want to thank all of you who are watching and who will watch later that are part of the Amplifying Whispers series. Our final series of the semester will be November 12th, right? November 12th. We'll come back in about 2 weeks and we'll have a conversation on race and psychology.
Ooh.
That should be pretty fun. So again, November 12th, we'll come back. We thank you for coming tonight. We, on behalf of my co-host Jasmine, the engineer, Brother Stephen, we thank you all for coming. God bless you. Good night.
Yay.